it's the simplest stitch of all. You tie a knot in one end, round knot, and then you thread through the eye of the needle. You hold the fabric taut between your fingers, and then you pierce the fabric, not your fingers, with the needle. Draw it through. And then you use the tip of your needle and you catch up the fabric once, twice. If it's even, you're skilled. 3 times. You draw it through. Might need to do it again. Catch it up. Draw it through. You smooth it all out. And there is your simple running stitch. It's a Paleolithic stitch. It's like the very first way that we pulled together 2 pieces of hide or 2 pieces of matted wool or 2 pieces of homespun cotton, 2 pieces of the finest light silk. Taking 2 separate things, bringing them together to make something useful. Ecclesiastes tells us there is a time to rend and a time to sow. And today is a time to consider sowing. When our children were young, some harebrained scheme of mine, I offered to teach their campfire club how to sew very simple garments. Okay? And most of the parents agreed. They would come and help their kids, and we would all do this together, except one mom couldn't be there to help. No problem. Just 11-year-old Mary, she was really well behaved. She was whip smart. I knew she would be fine just working alongside me. It's okay, just drop her off. Bring a couple yards of fabric. We'll go from there. When Mary and her mother got to my house, instead of just dropping her off, the mom hung around to talk for a while. I was polite, but I turned my attention to our work here. The fabric they brought. It's a very sensible blue, kind of a stiff blue. It was the blue of like shop rags. It was the blue of those like mechanics coveralls that my great uncles used to wear. I was like, oh. And judging by the navy pants and white shirt that Mary was wearing, I could tell vanity was discouraged in this home. That blue fabric was just too ugly to mess with. I told Mary to go dig through my stash of fabrics. That's what it's called, a stash. She found a piece of calico. It was light blue and sprigged with tiny white flowers, lightweight. It was perfect for the skirt pattern that she'd picked out. Meanwhile, her mother is explaining to me why she wasn't going to be able to help us. You see, she explained, her mother had never taught her to sew, never even wanted her to sew, because her mother wanted her to be an engineer or a scientist, and she didn't want her to be limited to girls' work, tied down by domestic drudgery. So I listened politely while showing Mary how to find the fabric's grain and to lay it smooth so that the garment would hang correctly, and how to lay out and pin the very delicate tissue paper pattern. And I listened while her mother told me that it was her mother's insistence that she never learned to cook or sew because she presumed that she would be earning enough money that someone else would always be able to do it for her. So that's why she never learned to sew and why she got a professional degree. And finally, I had had enough. I turned to Mary who was carefully pinning and cutting out the pieces. And I said, if you think about it, sewing is a type of construction. It's based upon engineering. And it's kind of tricky because you're working with a very flexible material with the goal of covering a moving body. It takes a fair amount of math and planning, and you have to understand the properties of both the fabric and how bodies move if you want to have a garment worth wearing, because badly sewn clothes are really very uncomfortable. Eventually, her mother ran out of excuses and left us in peace. Mary learned how to make a loose running stitch and then pull the thread to gather up the fabric. She learned how to fit the different sized pieces together and how to create a waistband tunnel to run the elastic through and how to hem the even bottom. Within a couple hours, she had finished a lovely 3-tiered skirt. She knew everything about that garment. There was no mystery to it because she had sewn it herself on the machine by hand. And when she finally slipped it on, she looked down at her work. And then she did the most pure thing of all. She spun around and watched it flare out and swirl around her knees. It was a magical moment. And I know that even if she never sews another thing for the rest of her life, she understood and understands the basics. And now when she looks at something that has been sewn, when she looks at the inside, the underside, the lining, or the back, she will see how something was put together. I want you all to do something right now. I want you to just look at the inside of your sleeve or the hem of your shirt. And I want you to see, can you see the threads that are holding the fabric in place? You'll probably see a very even line of stitching. Maybe you'll see kind of a web of threads that are keeping the edge from fraying. Maybe the thread is a contrasting color to the fabric, or maybe it's so perfectly matched you can barely even see the stitches on the right side of the garment. Someone's hands did that work. Everything we are wearing was sewn by another person, a human being. Every pillowcase and backpack and tennis shoe was sewn by someone. Every sofa cushion and slip cover and seatbelt was guided through a sewing machine by skilled workers. The suits that the astronauts wore were assembled by expert seamstresses. They had never built anything like this before, but they used their minds, their hands, their machines, and they worked to sew suits to protect the fragile human bodies against the infinite cold of space. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand that even now, in this modern era with amazing technology, at this time, we still do not have a machine where you can stuff a bale of cotton in one end and pull a pair of blue jeans out the other. We're still pretty much doing what our ancestors did, which is taking a flat piece of cloth, woven, knitted cloth, cutting out the pieces, sewing them together to fit and cover our shivering naked selves. Maybe your mother sewed clothes for you when you were younger, maybe. Maybe if you came in with a tear on your sleeve or a rip in your breeches, your mom did some kind of miraculous, mundane, mending miracle. I want you to know that along with my 10-inch chef's knife, my sewing machine is my greatest tool against chaos. I sewed clothing for my children when they were younger because they were so beautiful. And the clothing at the store was so unimaginative. I'd take them to the fabric store and let them pick out the fabric so that these were their garments. A woman I know makes quilts, and she explained that when she is sewing a quilt, it might mean that she is assembling 35 blocks of fabric stitched together. And so she cuts and stitches and presses the same thing 35 times. It becomes a meditative time for her. And as her hands work, her mind travels out into the quiet, fascinating places. If it will be a gift, she might be thinking of the people who are going to receive this quilt. And she says it's impossible to put a prayer into every stitch, but she does take care when she picks the fabrics so that it will bring a smile to the person who snuggles under that quilt at night. A man I know who quilts, he just simply says, "This is my safe place." His quilts are dazzling. They are so intricate, mind-bogglingly. Each quilt is made up of thousands of tiny pieces, bright cloth. He listens to audiobooks while he's working. So he's like, listen, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, those great big books that you always meant to read when you had the time. He's gone through them. While he listens, his hands cut and piece and pin and sew artwork of kaleidoscopic brilliance. It's boggling. This world would be a calmer place if each of us had a safe place like that. I was lucky enough to learn how to sew from my mother, who taught me the correct 4-H way of doing things, marking everything, and from my stepmother, who actually taught me all the ways that you adapt things and you be creative and you have fun. My mother's dresses were amazing, sewn out of Indonesian batiks, and they fit her perfectly to her petite frame. My stepmother's sewing was so amazing. She opened up her own business. She did alterations and the most beautiful, gorgeous wedding gowns that she designed and created, hand beading. These two women drew upon deep patience to teach me. So maybe not all the patience, but. And now when I spread out the fabric and pick up my shears, I have both of them with me and all of my grandmothers with me. This might be more familiar. Another woman I know, she was forced to learn sewing in school. Yeah. Because, back in the day, girls were taught sewing and boys went to wood shop. It was the natural order of things. And she hated it. She resisted it. And she called it out as a sexist holdover, because that's exactly what it was. But she made the damn skirt moaning and groaning the whole way, and then she was done with it. Years later, as an adult, though, she picked up a book about quilting, and she was stunned. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. The book pulled her in, and in time she found herself learning everything about quilting, how to use a sewing machine again, how to buy a sewing machine. She especially delights in all of the little doodads and things that people have invented to solve very specific sewing problems. So like bodkin. You know what a bodkin is? You use it to help turn a thin piece of fabric inside out. She loves the bobbins and the rippers and the pressers, all the little things. And she holds a very deep respect for the ingenuity and the engineering that paved the way for her to do all this creativity. And she loves choosing the colors and that moment when she drops in a piece of lilac or orange and the whole thing turns spectacular. She is very selective about who receives her quilts because each one is not just a blanket. It is a gift of her time. I know. These days, home sewing is anachronistic. It takes a lot of patience to learn how to sew, and it takes even more practice to learn how to sew well enough to make something you'd actually wear outside in public. So why bother? Someone else can do it better, cheaper, faster. I mean, there are people who are skilled laborers who get paid, right? Truth is, if you pay $5, $10, $15 for a t-shirt, you can be pretty sure that the person who sewed that shirt did not necessarily even get 50 cents. Even if you pay $50 for a shirt, you still cannot be sure that the person in Vietnam or the North Marianas or Nicaragua was actually paid a fair wage, a living wage. Remember the horrendous building that collapsed at a garment factory in Bangladesh a few years back? And those of us who know our history were reminded how that was like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, factory fire. The building collapse in Bangladesh killed some 1,100 workers and served to remind me, at least, that we've not only outsourced our industrial production, our industrial pollution, we've also outsourced our industrial accidents. And I also know that what makes it even more complicated is that many of those people who were killed were actually grateful to have that economic opportunity to lift them out of an even worse poverty. This is not a simple solution. If you're vigilant and not too fussy about your fashion, you can research your clothing choices, but there's really not a lot of fair trade garments out there on the market, unless you sew your own. See, when I wear something that I've sewn, I know that the only person who is unfairly compensated or exploited is me. What else can you do? How else can you stand in opposition to a global economy that treats workers and their products as disposable commodities? It's unrealistic for all of us to learn how to sew. But here's a suggestion. Treat every piece of clothing you own as if it was sewn especially for you. It might not have been hand-stitched, but hands did guide that fabric through the sewing machine, through the cutting, the stitching, the pressing. When you put on a shirt, consider the hands that carefully spaced the buttons and made sure that they were secure. Think of the hands that folded it, wrapped it for you. Wear it well. If a button falls off, catch it up quick, sew it back on. When it's worn beyond repair, snip off the buttons. They might come in handy someday. Even if only to put them into a box for the grandkids to play around them. Does anybody else remember button boxes? Yeah. You can still make a button box. You can take the worn out fabric and use it as a rag to clean your windows. Do you have a garment that you love, but it doesn't fit quite right now? Take it to a local seamstress for alterations. Make it fit now, not when you lose, when you gain, when you have the interview. Wear it now. That'll keep some dollars in our local economy. Keep us connected. Yeah. Now here's my last suggestion. If someone gives you something that they have sewn, a tea towel, a handkerchief, please don't say, oh, that's so pretty, thank you, and then put it away for a special time. Don't do that. Keep it out. Use it now. Put it on, spread it out, let the baby spit up on it, hang it in a place where you can grab it as you rush out the door. Wrap yourself up in it. And then twirl slowly around and see if you can feel the love as it swirls about you. May it be so, and blessed be.